are here today to talk about stakeholder engagement and why you need to engage your community. We have a fantastic roster of speakers that we're going to be getting to meet in about 15 minutes as we dive into the panel. But up first, I am going to kind of take some folks through who may be new to NationBuilder, why we are holding this conversation. So we at NationBuilder know that solving today's biggest challenges isn't about one leader, it's about millions. And we exist to make it possible for anyone to easily mobilize their community and lead them to action. Our theory of change is put into practice every single day with each of our customers, driving to create the change they desire to see in the world. To ensure that we are focused on this, we lean really heavily into our company vision and mission with all interactions from our product development to supporting our customers. So what the heck is our vision and mission? Making it possible for anyone, anywhere to take action, to lead their community, to start an organization, a campaign, a business, a movement is why NationBuilder exists. This mission is the reason that we do what we do every day. And our software is the infrastructure that empowers our customers, some of you are in the room, to actually step up and organize your community, whether it be through advocacy, stakeholder engagement, legislative engagement. Our software is there for the infrastructure to make that happen. So what actually is our software? It is an integrated platform where you have a dynamic people database, you have the ability to host multiple websites, you can email and text with your audience, you can also collect donations and fundraising and much more. And in exciting recent news, for those of you who may not be aware, we actually joined forces with the amazing technology that is ActionButton. So ActionButton was created to make sure that people never miss a moment to act when they're inspired. So what you're seeing here on the right-hand side is the ability to populate action buttons into newspaper articles all across the internet when a person is actually inspired in that moment to take action with an issue that they care about. For those of you who have seen our recent communications, you can absolutely go ahead and get started right now with what we're calling Build Your Own Button. But there is a premium offering that the ActionButton team has been doing for a while now, which is where you can actually create those custom action buttons, then dynamically place them into content, and then understand the data based on your engagement and your impact. And so that is a new software offering for this audience that I wanted to make sure you all had before we dived into today's content. So with that being said, what is the current landscape? Over the last 10 years, we have been at the forefront with global brands using our software. We have a history of working with brands that actually wanted to change their industries. They didn't just need to raise brand awareness. They needed to mobilize public support, change the minds of those in power, and ultimately create structural change at the government and regulatory levels. However, it is clear that this is an area that is seeing more action than ever. And one of our partners, Edelman, in their latest Trust Barometer report, highlights why it's a space that any sensible company can no longer ignore. What you're seeing here are just some of the highlights from that report, where we have 68% of consumers believing that their power to force corporations actually is change. 62% of employees believe they have the power to force corporations to change, whether or not that be the ones they are working for or ones that they are consumers of. And 50% of employees are likely, than the last year, to voice any objections to their management or engage in a workplace protest. What we're seeing is that stakeholder engagement for any corporation is more important now than it ever has been. And so we have 5 kind of key strategies that we've identified that work across the board with that. Up first, say goodbye to this concept of big data. You need to be smarter with the data you collect. Don't just collect it for the fun of collecting data, right? Analyze and aggregate it to actually paint a picture of the individual who is behind that data. It is not just about spreadsheets. It's about understanding who the individual is and why you want them to take action. Identify your data goals. What are you actually collecting this data for? It shouldn't be vanity metrics, right? You should be understanding what your goals are with your data. And last but not least, what is their relationship to your organization? Why are they involved? Is it a stakeholder? Is it an elected official? Is it someone who is in the local community that you're trying to persuade based on what actions you want them to take? Number 2 is finding your 5%. So the top 5% of your database or your audience are what we refer to as your leaders or your advocates. You actually need these people if you hope to create any type of advocacy program or stakeholder engagement program where you are driving people to action. 92% of stakeholders are more likely to act based on a friend's referral over any traditional marketing effort. It is so important to identify the people who are organically doing this work on your behalf so that they can ultimately create their networks and bring them into the organizing work that you're doing. And lastly is 4.7% of typical companies' base drives 100% of its word of mouth. That is a really important data point for you to think about as you're creating these programs to really drive organic recruitment efforts within the base you're already engaging with. Thirdly, build a strong community. I am so excited for the panelists that we have today because in our prep conversations, all we got into is this idea of organizations actually needing to build a community. To do that, you have to understand your audiences. There are going to be different buckets of people, whether it be elected officials or your local chambers of commerce, selectmen, etc., that you need to speak to in a very intentional way to actually drive engagement within your community. You need to build trust through authentic engagement. It cannot be boilerplate press language. It just can't. It has to be authentic from your actual supporters. Can't just come from leadership. That's what we've seen. And lastly is empower local leaders to engage their networks. It is so much more powerful if someone in the local community is actually sharing a message as opposed to a company coming into a local community and forcing that message. Fourth, privacy by default. You need to gain consent. Long gone are the days of buying a list and just email blasting it because you can. You are not going to get authentic engagement from these people. This has been one of the core tenets at NationBuilder, that our customers own and can effectively manage their own data. You need to develop clear paths of engagement for your advocates. There is no point in sending someone to a petition that doesn't have a follow-up. Why am I signing the petition? What's it going to do? What does it matter if I reach out to this legislature, right? You really need to make it clear what those ladders of engagement are. And know who, how, and when people want to be in conversation with you. Some people may absolutely love to receive mailers. Some people may only want to communicate via text. You should know that about your audience and therefore direct your communications in that way. And last but not least, this one is fairly obvious, but personalization is key. It is so worth mentioning this because it is a tactic that still we see to this day that many companies overlook. A personalized experience from your website is a thing that your audience actually has come to expect. They come to understand that you are tracking what they're doing. So therefore, if you're doing that, render that data in a meaningful way. Don't just track data for the sake of data. Think back to number one here. Make it personalized. Allow for people to actually engage with your content in a personal way. Reflect back what your advocates have done for your organization. There are so many strategies and tactics that we could talk about in this space, but the key here is if someone has done something for you, share that with them, thank them, take them on a customized journey based on how they've engaged with you. And lastly, develop dynamic asks for your advocates based on that historic engagement. For example, if someone has never, ever, ever taken legislative action, that's probably not going to be the best call to action to give them in a first email when they've ever heard from you, right? Think about it. Be strategic in how you actually communicate with folks using dynamic content. That is enough from me. I am now going to kind of turn it into our panel. And so I'm going to stop my screen share and I would love to have everyone just kind of do a brief introduction. So Alice, we will start with you and then we will jump in to Jay.
Thanks, Saoirse. And yeah, very excited to be here and part of the NationBuilder family. I'm heading up partnerships at ActionButton. We, as Saoirse just so delightfully told us all, are trying to make it easier for people to take action and engage with news and content by reaching people in moments of inspiration and really closing that gap between a moment of intention and wanting to do good and engage with an area of social impact and actually being able to take that action. And yeah, excited to be here today. It's been a huge year for us in terms of communities engaging. So excited to start the conversation with everyone.
Thanks, Alice. All right, Jay.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Alice. I'm looking forward to learning more about the product. My name's Jay Vincent. I'm the CEO of a very small firm called Outreach Experts. I say very small because we're right around 10 folks at Outreach Experts. And it always seems weird when somebody calls himself a CEO of a small firm like that. And I like to think that it means that I'm the Chief Engagement Officer. And it turns out to be the case, right? I spent most of my time dealing with client work and really working with my team hand in glove to do the work that Sorsha so eloquently laid out, that NationBuilder helps support. So really excited to be on this call today and hear from Audrey.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. Audric.
All right, there we go. Audric Dodds. I'm the Director of Community Relations and Strategic Partnerships for a company named CNX Resources. We are a natural gas exploration and midstream company. We are in Pennsylvania drilling Marcellus natural gas, so I'm sure you've heard of that a little bit. And for us, it's getting engagement with the community and our different stakeholders is really the key, right? I mean, for us, we as a producer get the most attention in the news and with elected officials. And what people don't see is all of the folks that work with us, right? The landowners, the different vendors to help us produce the product. And we talk about we've had all types of things brought up with respect to natural gas, and no one really thinks about those folks down the line. And so for us, making sure that those people feel and understand that they're part of a larger community and are part of how we, what happens publicly in addition to how we develop the gas is really important. So it's a key piece to what I do.
Awesome. Thank you, Audric. And last but definitely not least, Max.
Hi, Sorsha. Thanks for having me on today. So I'm Max Debrixio. I'm a public engagement manager with Apex Clean Energy. We're a renewable energy developer working throughout the U.S. So I work on utility scale wind and solar farms, especially in Midwestern states. And coming from a community organizing and political background, one thing that I really appreciate about my work at Apex is getting to bring kind of that community organizing lens to the projects that we're doing in these communities so that we don't feel like an outside company that is coming in and doing this project to a community, but we're really making sure that this is a partnership with the folks who are going to be playing host to this project. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more today about how we make those partnerships.
Awesome. Thank you for giving me a really perfect lead-in. So we're going to go into a panel now where I am going to try and work tech magic and put our wonderful speakers on the stage. So you're not just seeing my big head. And let's go ahead and do that. Okay, fantastic. All right, so first question I want to make sure that we kind of dig into today is around acquisition. Acquisition can mean so many different things. I know that all of you have a different experience when it comes to net new acquisition, re-engagement acquisition. And so very broad question intentionally of what are some of the best acquisition tactics when it comes to specifically stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management? And Max, we'll start with you.
Sure. So, and I know a number of our questions today are also kind of in light of coming out of COVID, so I think one thing that has been a real challenge for us is so many of the tactics that I'm used to rely on face-to-face communication, and our tactics are that in-person networking in really small communities where we are kind of looked at as this outsider for a rural area that may not have a lot of new folks coming in. So how do we still kind of initiate those relationships with folks in a more digital way? So we, like I think a lot of folks on this panel have tried a lot of different digital strategies over the course of the last year, and have found some of those to be more successful than others.
Awesome. Yeah, and Jay, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I find that, with often, especially when we're working energy projects, right, there's a difference between primary and secondary stakeholders. And I still find that the most effective acquisition target for a certain type of key stakeholder, the primary key stakeholder, that's, the person that owns the land, maybe the people that are within the 250 feet or maybe quarter mile kind of radius of a project, based on the legislative or municipal regulatory requirements of a project. So like the acquisition of like the primary stakeholders in our outreach experts, especially when it comes to energy, is still often acquired through those kind of old school tactics, right? You're buying that list. Now you're just kind of layering in that GIS layer on top of it. But what we found certainly in the pandemic here is that delivering sign up, that registration experience digitally for those folks that we were acquiring in the very kind of what I would call the analog way, transforming them into somebody, kind of a call to action that says, hey, in this day and age, we need you to invite people to register and to come to this place for the purposes of really sorting people. But from their perspective, it's kind of the front door to the project. So often, and certainly over the past year, we've kind of seen the design of that front door radically change. And it's actually been super helpful from my perspective as kind of a stakeholder engagement person, is that, I do need to segment people, and I need to say certain things to certain individuals that might be different than regular or elected official, for instance. So the willingness I've seen of people to kind of come through a front door like that's very much purpose built to segment them we've really seen more acceptance of that in the past year. And I think that's a net benefit really as we look forward to the future. The opponents, to whatever the perspective is at that point, still will kind of cry foul maybe about a tactic like that, but much less so in the past year. And I see that as something, something really helpful, especially as we try to work more locally.
Yeah. And you bring up a piece around that like new front door. Alice, I'd love to hear from you on like, what does that look like from a technical perspective with ActionButton's technology in that new front door era?
Yeah, thank you. And Max, it was like great to hear from you about the kind of shifting tactics from real life experiences to digital experiences, which I think is definitely something that ActionButton is trying to do. So we're trying to reach people in the right moments, like within articles and content, and give people actions that are directly related to those articles and content. So we actually had quite a lot of our partners coming to us and saying like, oh, like once the pandemic started, we obviously don't have those real life opportunities anymore. But ActionButton, because you're engaging people from the right moments and giving them ways to take action in that moment, you are really creating a bit of a unique experience for them. And we are able to use acquisition tactics within that. But I would say from our point of view, we find that giving someone something of value that is meaningful to them, so say it's making their voice heard, signing a petition, emailing Congress, like instead of just straight out asking for an email address, is a good way to build that sense of community and for them to feel like they're getting something out of that experience too.
Awesome. And Audric, I've worked with you for many years, so I know some of your acquisition tactics. I would love to have you share that with the group.
Sure. So especially with everything that we just went through with COVID this last year, everything that the panel said so far was true for us as well. But we got really creative in like the voter pledge, right? We knew that folks had a lot of passion around, the election. It was a big election. It was an election where there's a lot of energy topics. So we knew that there was a lot of energy around it. But what we wanted to do was see if we could find digital ways to connect with people. We couldn't go do pledge to vote cards and those type of things. So we actually did a digital acquisition and pledge to vote campaign. And we partnered that with kind of traditional methods with mail, right? Okay. So folks would register to vote, and we would use different platforms to get people to register to vote. We would acquire data on the way in about who they are, and then we would send them a sticker, right? And we send them a sticker about being an energy voter, and then we ask them to take action off of that sticker, right? So now we're COVID, people are at home, we're delivering content into their homes, and then giving them something to do, a real thing to do. And it wasn't something difficult like call your legislator. It was like, hey, put on this sticker and take a picture, and then send that back to us. And it really had this viral type of outcome for us, because the sticker became something that people wanted, right? And we also built it in a way that we were able to tap into the pride that folks had about working in the energy industry. Yeah. And so, being an energy voter was a tool that we used to, do a lot of acquisition and kind of get people to take, the most important action which was get out and vote.
So powerful to think about the ability of like understanding what an individual self-identifies with and then using that to help them move forward with a new action. all of you kind of briefly touched on COVID, and it's kind of, very important component of what it has done to stakeholder engagement, any type of advocacy. What is one or two strategy that you will not leave behind as we hopefully continue forward and move into a non-COVID era? So yeah, one or two strategies. Jay, why don't you take us away?
I've seen the willingness of some of our customers to experiment with like the question of when to engage, what time of day, and for instance, for when we're working in a kind of a very local process, or even maybe a state level regulated process, it's often that our choir in the evenings, right? Because that's when the public hearings happen. That's when the comment hearings and sort of regulatory meetings happen. So both our customers and those that set those meetings have been much more willing to change the time of day. So you're seeing meetings from 7 to 9, 9 to 11, when that would have been the most inconvenient time for people to go in the past, to go to these meetings in the past, because they're at their job. Whereas now they can go online, but they're also kind of behind the door of their physical home, and they're more willing, it seems, to do something in the middle of the day that they wouldn't allow themselves to do at the office. So that's kind of on both the regulator end and also the stakeholders end. The idea of bringing more people into these processes is hampered by a very rigorous approach to what time of day or what day of the week even having physical meetings was always a requirement. So with that down, Zoom fatigue, maybe I've had a little personal Zoom fatigue, right? But this is a game changer really and I don't often use that sort of kind of that wording. It really is a big sea change for folks that are doing this sort of work, because you can now, as a person that's looking to include more people, to be more inclusive, to bring more diverse voices, you don't have to just have that one, we can have a hearing from 7 to 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Now you can engage on a more one-on-one basis in the digital format. And I think all of those things are here to stay. And I think that is a net positive. And really looking back at my kind of campaign days, working in politics, this sort of stuff was kind of the organizing 101, and to bring it into the kind of corporate or association setting, et cetera, is a big step. I'm surprised it's taken this long, but I guess it took a pandemic to get us to this sort of a point, because it's critical.
Yeah, and Max, I know you have a kind of deep background as well in political organizing. Are you seeing the similar trends within Apex work?
Yeah, very much so. So I think one of the things that was a big challenge for us at the very beginning of the pandemic is we tried to do some virtual events, and they were really poorly attended, and we were trying to figure out what the disconnect was. For long stretches of our project, we don't have that really important action that Alice was talking about. We don't have a make or break, I need you to do this today. And so we kind of stepped back and looked at, well, what are the other reasons that people stay engaged and they participate in these things? And a big one of those is building community, right? It's because they feel like they're part of a community, their friends are doing it and showing up to these events. And maybe because, we feed you, and so you'll come out for food. And so we did some virtual pizza parties. And we said, we'll work with a local pizza place and we'll help get you delivery, and we'll all sit in our living rooms and we'll have pizza together over Zoom. But we still brought in that community aspect where folks felt like they were sitting with their neighbors, even in that difficult situation. And so while we may not necessarily keep the tactic of eating pizza in our living rooms and talking on camera, I think there was a really valuable note of just stepping back and figuring out, how do we bring the really important pieces of community building and our usual face-to-face work into any digital tactic that we're using to make sure folks still have that piece that makes them want to engage.
I love that. That was something that we had across the board at NationBuilder, and I'm sure all of you had this desire for community during COVID, and to hear that it's actually a part of an engagement strategy just brings me some deep joy. Audric, Alice, anything to add on strategies that you think will stick around in a post-COVID era?
I'll go quickly. So this concept of community that Max was talking about, we definitely experienced that as we went through COVID, and we also try to find ways to bring people together digitally. So like like I said before, with mail, we were able to deliver things to people's homes, and that could supplement the work that we were doing digitally, right? And what we found from that mail was a higher engagement. When people signed up to do something, right, they did it, right? Because there was a bottle of wine in there for the painting party that we did, and there was, the burger challenge that we did, all the chop box that we sent. So we got really creative in how to, get people, engaged, building that sense of community. And the final piece was, and this is the piece that we will keep going forward. There's doing things together live really seemed to matter, right? And we got a lot of engagement from like the live stream, and then people following up to support their friends, right? So we did a burger challenge. We did that, we got together, we people made burgers, and we kind of had a live event around it. People posted to this platform, the burger and the recipe. But what happened from there was, people got competitive, and they said, well, how do I support my buddy? And now, our content is on Facebook, and it's in their Twitter feed, and they're soliciting folks to kind of come in and help. Well, all along that time, we're collecting content into the platform, right? They got to sign in to vote and do all these type of things. So as we move forward and we go back to live events, and we do something like axe throwing, right? And we have teams from sponsors, from companies. How do we take a step deeper into that company? Well, perhaps there's, some digital content that we can deliver that the people in the office can engage with, right? And as we're doing that, it's been like this thing we just haven't been able to figure out all these years is it's one thing to do our live event and to get the main sponsor and to get the owner of the business to come. But it's another thing for him to engage his 200 employees, right? So now if we create competition and those digital pathways for people to participate, they can't bring all 200 employees to the event, but we can distribute that content to them digitally, and then they can participate somewhere like that. Those are things that we are going to keep. We're trying to figure out how to blend kind of those digital learnings that we got from, like the unconventional games that we did, and, our live events that we're coming back to in the future.
And I'll just add quickly on there, which I think everyone's kind of touched on, as well as the kind of speed that everyone used to adapt to the changing environment. And I think like changing tactics, changing strategies of how to engage with your community. I think everyone mentioned the Zoom fatigue, and we definitely went through phases of like having action hours and everyone kind of gathering together, which I think was really meaningful at the time. And then like we had to adapt as like the Zoom fatigue set in to different ways for people to take action and engage, like different platforms. And we were like very quick at the beginning to like be giving people ways to take action through like COVID toolkits and things like that. I think one thing we'll want to take out of it is to keep on listening to our community and keep on being very quick to adapt when it's needed, instead of just assuming that we can continue as normal. And those might not be the routes that you want to engage your community, the ways that you want to engage your community, or the way that they want to be engaged anymore.
Sorcha, if I could just kind of pile on from one thing that Alice mentioned there, the willingness to listen. I think all of us have become personally better at that. I think our businesses have probably become better at that. But I think that it's more that you're going to give an answer to is actually ask, like what you were talking about earlier, personalization and all of that. Responsiveness to data that about a person, asking them to do things that they'll do, and not asking them to do things that they told you they don't want to do. The sort of change has really, we've seen just a massive willingness increase in people to complete surveys, very short surveys that do a lot to help you listen to your community. And the definition, from my perspective, of community in the past year has changed. I used to say that, in the 50s and 60s, stakeholders were who a company said were their stakeholders, right? And that was just how it was. The consultants put it all on a chart, and those are the stakeholders. And in just the past 10 years, the definition of stakeholder has changed to anyone who says they're a stakeholder of your organization. And so anybody that thinks they're a member of your community in a way is today more willing, I believe, to participate in surveys. So get in the business, I think, of asking questions. even if they're simple questions that you can put a tag on in the NationBuilder parlance, right? You can tag that survey question and really make a difference in how you engage folks and show that you're listening. We need to keep listening for people to build the ongoing strength they need to be willing to participate in that sort of relationship with us. So being responsive is essential. So
that's such an important point. And I actually think opens up to a question I really wanted to ask all of you is, why is it important that a corporation should build a community, right? Like, we know what community means. Everyone has their own kind of verbiage around what this concept of community is, whether it's your local church, whether it is your like local elected officials, a library, whatever that looks like for you. But what we're seeing in 2019 through to today is that corporations have this responsibility, or so it would appear, to build communities. And why do y'all think that's important? Someone grab the mic.
Well, you know, a friend of mine, I think a friend of a couple of us on this call, a guy named Nick O'Malley, wrote a book called The End of Big. And in The End of Big, he made this argument that like this organizing software, this sort of technology that exists today is really kind of destroyed big institutions and empowered small groups of people to accomplish things, right? And it sounds kind of cliche to say that, but there's just such a truth to it. So, you know, why don't I pause there and kind of maybe offer it back to the group to kind of chime in here, because I don't want to take up all the time talking about this, but it's a really important topic.
Yeah, I think I'm someone who's personally very community minded anyway, and I think it does just build that sense of a two-way partnership and like that feeling of trust when you are building that sense of community and that sense of inclusion and that feeling that people are being able to make their voice heard and enter that position of partnership with a corporation, which I think very much definitely like shifts the kind of power dynamic feel and just makes them feel like they have that kind of personalized relationship with them. And Saoirse, to your point earlier, I think that those people, the ones who are the real advocates and are really involved in that community, are going to go so much further for a corporation in terms of spreading the word and getting other people involved. And so I think once you've convinced those people and created a really positive experience for them, it kind of builds in terms of community and support for you.
Yeah.
In some ways, it just feels really strategically critical to build that sense of community. In the first job I had as an organizer, I was working on President Obama's campaign, and I was told right away, people will come because they support President Obama, but they will stay for you and for the other volunteers that they're working with, because these are their friends, right? And that's who they'll keep showing back up for. And so just like Alice was saying, if you want people to continue engaging, if you want them to be willing to take on greater leadership, that will be because they feel like they are part of a community. And that also, I think, is especially in our work, where we're often in these very rural, tight-knit, small communities, it's really critical to be able to demonstrate that for folks who have been part of that community for a long time, that we're here to stay. And building a community around the work that you're doing there helps to demonstrate that we're not coming in here doing a fly-by-night project, we're going to get our money and get out, but we really intend to be members of this community for the long term and to be partners with folks that are here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, with local engagement, right? So you take an industry like ours, where we generate energy. The important piece from a corporate perspective is to make sure that when we're in that community, they understand where they fit into the life cycle of that, right? Like, you are a landowner, yes, but you are a part of something bigger than just what EQT or CNX or any producer is doing. We're part of like an energy community. So like we have to we have to maintain our social license to operate there, right? So the corporation has to have a social purpose, right? And so we understand our purpose. Like, we generate energy. Everyone consumes energy. And then our job is to make sure the folks in those communities understand they're part of, yes, your community here, but you're part of a much larger community. And when we think about clean energy and decarbonization and those type of things, it's important to help those folks see their role in that too, right? It isn't just the molecules that we produce out of the ground. It's all of us together, the supply chain, the landowners, the community members, the local legislator, right? Like if you are in an energy producing county, hey, you local legislator, you're a part of a larger global narrative around clean energy. So that's, community is obviously key for us to move forward. And if we don't maintain our social license to operate, guess what? We don't get to do the things that a corporation needs to do, which is create your shareholder value.
Yeah. And what mediums, if any, and it doesn't have to be COVID era, but like what mediums are you seeing that are the most effective in actually building community? When I'm saying mediums, I mean kind of across the board, both digital and in person, think mail, town hall, like what's been the most valuable in actually building that community?
Tactically, we've seen kind of exclusive Facebook groups that are marketed to kind of an affinity group or like kind of a stakeholder segment. Be a really effective way at keeping people interested over the past year. I think it's something that we certainly, it's something we experimented with before and just did not see success with it. It's like starting a magazine almost. But the pandemic changed that a little bit for some of our public education campaigns and for some of our employee ambassador programs, which we've used these in. So I'd say technically, kind of exclusive Facebook group has been really an effective way also to inform people, but still needing to connect them back to some sort of hub off that platform.
Yeah. So using social media as an amplification tool as opposed to an actual organizing tool. Audrey, go for it.
Yeah, I would say for us, and when I say us, I'm talking about the Shell Energy Alliance, right? So that's a collection of producers and energy companies. And actually, one of my colleagues is on, Josie, and we were talking earlier about this broadcast here. And what we did was we tried to get to well, I guess is termed narrowcasting. So when we did digital engagement, it wasn't about putting people in a Zoom call or a WebEx. It was like, what is the experience that participant has when they're online, right? So, and how do we make that more engaging, right? So, we were doing everything live, just like how you guys have this chat here to the side. We make sure that we control the chat, we moderate the chat, we pump the chat up to make to keep people engaged over there. And just thought of it more as, look, it's one thing for them to sit and look at me. There's another thing for us to kind of look at this from a broadcast perspective for this targeted group, Narrowcast, and put some real quality into the content, right? So support graphics and lower thirds and different B-roll and all that type of stuff for a digital stream, right? Which is really like a panel like this. So we really spent a lot of time investing in those things, and I think that's the future potentially of like digital engagement. It's like, how do we take these 5 people that are in different places all over the country and make it into content that people want to watch, right? And then when you get them engaged, now you're able to get your message across, and then they take the additional actions on the back end, right?
Yeah. Did anyone dabble in TikTok?
We did actually, at ActionButton, we did. Yes, so Anna, our fantastic intern, was dabbling with TikTok. I kind of feel like, I speak for most people, and I feel like I'm too old to try and infiltrate that platform without there being a big backlash in terms of what are you doing here. But we did try, and she had a really authentic voice on TikTok, and was like basically talking about ways that people can take action. I think she was also testing out like different days, like trying to make action a habit through like taking action every day and giving people advice on that. So that was very interesting to witness. QR codes, I feel like, was another thing that we were using a lot of, that we're definitely bringing to a lot of our corporation and brand partners these days. I feel like it was the year that everyone got used to using them on menus, and we were trying to use that as a very easy way for people to take action from things that might not necessarily be within our publisher network, could be like from TV programming, install, and things like that.
Awesome. Max, I saw you on mute before I dived into TikTok.
Yeah, well, I was going to pivot to something that started out as an offline tactic for building community, but turned digital when we got into the pandemic. Is Jay had talked a little bit about the importance of listening earlier in terms of that building community. And so for one of our public education campaigns, we did kind of this rolling ongoing series where we were able to frame kind of the whole series around questions that had come up from the community or concerns that different people had, and providing information that was really directly targeted at what they wanted to learn more about. What is it that folks are seeing or hearing, et cetera. And so doing a few of those and getting kind of this whole group of folks who are interested and engaged and asking more questions and coming back month after month let us build a good enough base that when we got to the pandemic, we were able to take that into a continued virtual set and still have those folks show up and engage and ask questions and learn more about our projects.
That's awesome. Audric, anything to add on your end? No? Okay.
Yeah, I think you guys covered it.
Awesome. I have one last question before we turn it over to the audience for some questions. So right now, it is quite polarized in the United States as it pertains to our political infrastructure. And so I know that everyone here has experienced the idea of legislative advocacy and engaging with folks from both sides of the aisle. What does it actually look like to build relationships with someone who you may actually be completely differing in as it pertains to what your goals are from a corporation or from a client aspect, and then truly build a relationship with an elected official or a regulatory body to then move the needle on what your goal is? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think it's all about commonality, right? It's just like with anything. I mean, so for us, as we think about energy policy, and it's something that's, the country's really looking at, here in Pennsylvania, Democrats have been really difficult sometimes on energy, right? Especially not just energy, but natural gas, right? But it's reframing the conversation and helping them understand like where we fit into like a larger discussion around decarbonization, right? So so we have, build relationship, give them information, give them knowledge. There's a lot of kind of things that are unknown about how we produce energy, right? So this it's kind of traditional education, right? That what a government affairs professional would do, but making sure that they understand like the bigger picture and making sure we have a good story to tell, kind of with respect to how we actually get from where we are today to where we want to be, right? So and then helping them see again kind of where they fit into that. So someone in one of our operating areas that's might on surface not align with us because of political ideology, you say, well, here's how it actually works, and here's where you fit into that, and then they can kind of begin to carry your message in their different communities.
Max,
Jay, you're off mute, so I don't want to jump in front of you.
No, please go ahead.
I would say for us, one of the most important things has just going back to community organizing 101. If I'm going into a new community, I ask a lot of questions and I listen before I come out with my agenda. And of course, folks know we have an agenda. Of course, we are running a business and we want to make money. But if we go into communities and the first thing we ask are, what are the pain points in this community? What's going on here? What are the headaches and what are the challenges? Being able to come to a set of elected officials and say, as part of this project, we found out that this whole section of this county has really terrible internet. And there is a partnership we've identified where our wind project and the infrastructure work that we're doing can help to bring better internet service to these 250 households. Well, that's a lot of constituents for that person. And so identifying a community need and finding a way that we can help address that is a really great way to reach across the aisle, because regardless of what color you're wearing, if we've found something that matters to the people in your community, you've got to be responsive to that.
Oh yeah, that's massive. Jay?
I thought what I'd add on top of here is just kind of knowing my political background, and kind of the organizing that I've done in my life. And the messages that I spread when I worked in politics, right? The tactics of, information and misinformation, et cetera. Campaigns can be very tough, all out fights. It's a big reason why I left that sort of work, right? I was done being paid to hate the other guy. I would prefer to build consensus. This is just from my human perspective, right? I would much rather win together than win alone. And that's not a trait that everyone has. Some people really like to win alone, and I'm not attacking that. What I am saying is that I was done being in the business of hating the other guy. And instead, I want to be in the business of building up the community and helping companies be better members of the community. Back in the 2012 election, right before that, there was a landmark campaign finance reform decision. And I can remember Mitt Romney saying that, the one thing I agree with that decision is that corporations are people. Corporations are people too, right? And I seized on that. This was like in maybe the second year that I had created Outreach Experts, and it changed the way that I was talking about the work I did, because I was saying for once in my life that I agreed with Mitt Romney. Corporations are people too, and they have a responsibility, right, to act like people. And people don't treat their neighbors that way. Most people don't treat their neighbors that way. And certainly that's what I think has changed over the past decade, is that people now think companies need to act like people, and they need to have a set of values that are public, that we wear on our sleeve, and that people can judge them by, right? And so, some of that's good, some of that's bad, some of that has gone on to mean attacks on perfectly fine companies, just because of some things that not everyone agrees with, and I'm not going to point out who those folks are either. That would be a horrible, horrible chore to do. But I think you understand what you understand what I mean on this front. It's corporations need to act like people, and they need to build community and think of community from that perspective. So I'll stop rambling.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, Alice, please.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to the themes that we've said today as well, in terms of the listening, but also in terms of things I think we've learned from the pandemic and from COVID, and things that we probably want to continue and highlight all of the great impact and things that were achieved, like through some lessons that were learned, I think, during the pandemic, in terms of lots of organizations collaborating together when things are needed, and collaborating with government in terms of that feeling of human empathy. I think that there was just an outpouring of human empathy when everyone saw what was happening around the world. And I think keeping some of those lessons for coming out of there will be really important in terms of bridging those divides and trying to achieve things together.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, so everyone get your questions in. We've got 10 minutes. So we have one here coming from Peter. Thank you for joining us. It's late at home. So up first, when engaging the public, how would you prioritize resources between broadcasting to your audience versus being available to your audience, i.e. one-to-one, chats, emails, and calls? Anyone want to jump at that from our panel?
I still lean on a kind of real fundamental approach here, and it's the quadrant analysis. Judge a person's interest versus their influence. Track it on a quadrant analysis, and whoever's in your upper right quadrant are the folks that you kind of really focus in on, that extra sort of attention. That's the one meetings, the personal phone calls, maybe even text. We see that more and more folks, even elected officials, about things than we used to see, before the pandemic. So it's, I think that's what I would offer, Sorcha. Basic quadrant analysis.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on that one? No? Okay. Let me see. Do I have any other chats in here? Q&A. You're a quiet bunch. Okay. And do any of you have questions for each other, of my panelists?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how, thinking of who you might consult with, and I know, Audric, you work for a company, so you're not like a consultant yet, but you might have been a consultant in the past. But when you're justifying your role. You're talking about, this is for all of us, you're justifying your role as the government affairs person or the public affairs person, whatever it might be, and you're talking to them about the ways that your stakeholders or your community has changed. Like who has changed inside that group, and maybe what are some of the insights the group might have around, long term, like who are the groups or customer segments that might become more important over others? I mean, I'm just curious to see how your attention has changed really to dealing with the various stakeholders that exist out there.
Oh, Audric, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm working on it. So for us, so it's kind of been like this evolution, right, over time, and you just learn certain things. And what we know now, right, is that that when you're in a rural community and you're doing something that is an industrial process, the community members have to be first and foremost. And at first, I think the industry was more concerned about like just kind of getting the product out, and then you would do a bunch of bad things that would damage your social license, and then the people in the community would start to complain, and they go to their legislator, and next thing you know, boom, you got a zoning problem, right? So now we think about that much more differently, right? It's like, all right, so how do I get into a community even before we begin operations to build rapport and say, hey, this is what you can expect. Yep. Here's someone you can call. Make sure the people that are supposed to be picking up the phones are indeed picking up the phones, right? Because these are the things that will damage your credibility in a community, right? So I could be the greatest community relations person in the world, and I could go in and spend bunch of money with my foundation in support of, building goodwill. But if we don't pick up the phone call when someone has a land issue, well, there we go. We've eroded all the goodwill we put in. So, I think, you got to get your company to think more along those lines, right? Everyone has kind of the thing that they're there to do. The land guy has a thing that he's trying to do, and then the pipeline guy has a thing he's trying to do, and he has KPIs and metrics that, tell him that he's doing a good job. My job is to make sure the company understands, look, if we don't operate a certain way, like a human, like Jay said, you won't be here, right? And it starts with a local ordinance, and then it becomes a state issue. And then before you know it, it's you've got a battle on your hands. So it's better to deal with this stuff with your constituents well in advance. And the thing I think that is the easiest is just to communicate. Hey, this is what you're going to see. And if it deviates from this, then here's a person to call. So I think that's the biggest shift, right? Like when I got into the industry in 2008, it was rip and run, and maybe even not pay attention to, you shouldn't be sending a heavy truck down the same path where there's kids going to school at that time, right? It's like, let's rethink our routes, and it might be a little bit less efficient, but when it comes to, building community and keeping your license in that community, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, really, it's almost like earning their license again, right? Because it moves.
Absolutely.
To me, it's that right. We have a right to do this. We're going to drill wherever we want to drill. We're going to build pipelines. We have our right to eminent domain, and that pendulum switches because who acts like that? Who shows up in town and says, that just doesn't get you anywhere? And it's certainly, this is kind of my poorly made point earlier about technology and Nico Melle's The End of Big. It's put the power back into people's hands in a big way, and you can't hide from your bad acting anymore. You can't just pretend like you're going to show up and try to get your project permitted while everybody is on vacation in August, right? It just doesn't. It just you can't. Thankfully, you can't do that anymore. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, in my mind too, even from like a government affairs perspective, is it's almost like you have to take your issues to the people now, right? Before you could just go to, the leader of whatever, caucus, and he would just push a bill through. Like those days are over. Like you're gonna get pushback, in your legislative district when you do things in that manner, right? So like my job as a government affairs person is to give and create, that awareness and education so that the person can go do the thing I need him to do, because he needs the people, right? It isn't kind of these unilateral, decisions anymore around legislation. You've got the grassroots piece is absolutely huge because people do have a voice, and with the social media and digital, it is easy to get your message out there. So you got to help on that front.
Max.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would say something that I think our company is recognizing is even beyond our own social license, with the ability of a story about any project anywhere in our industry to just go viral and be seen by the folks who we might be trying to engage with. Even before we've entered a community, there might already be a black mark on wind or on solar from something that they've heard. And so I think that makes it even a step farther that we need to be in getting ahead of those issues by meeting with folks right away, by starting to build that trust. And like Audrey said, that social license, so that by the time we are getting to that permitting stage or anything else, we've laid a really good foundation for the work we're doing.
Yeah. It's so refreshing to hear each one of you today share so vehemently about trust, authenticity, listening, and Audric, your example of the days are gone of I can go up and I know that they're in charge of the caucus, and so that caucus is going to move Bill X through. It's actually it's so powerful. And if I think back to NationBuilder's theory of change, right, of it takes millions, it feels like we're actually getting to that point where people, the individual constituents, actually have a voice. And to Jay, what you're sharing around corporations now having a responsibility to be a person and actually incorporate and engage with the individuals to make something happen, it's just it's a feel-good moment for me. And so we have 2 minutes left. Any closing words of wisdom from the amazing panel that we have here? I'm going to make you all do a 1-word, 2-word checkout for why you need to engage your community.
I just make it meaningful. And that's basically knowing what they want to hear about, talking to them about the things that they've told you they want to talk about, engaging them on their terms, not your own, and kind of showing a radical unselfishness. So I'll be radically giving.
Radically giving and unselfish. I like that. Max.
I think that's pretty well said, Jay. I think the only word that I would add is how important it is to make everything feel like a partnership. That folks know when we're coming in as a business that we want to see some benefit out of this project, and we just have to make sure we've done the work that this benefit will accrue to everybody that's involved, and will really be a rising tide that lifts all ships in this community.
Awesome. Alice.
I've loved so many things about this panel. I love that human element that Jay brought in terms of and I think that really drives so many of us, that empathy, that human element, and thinking of business people and people in our community as humans that we can reach out to and work with and partner with. But I think, just that ongoing listening piece, so not just once, but just keeping on listening to your community so that you can know that you're giving them ways to interact with you in a way that's meaningful to them.
And Audric, take us home.
All right, so I will kind of stress the importance of having a multi-platform approach to your community engagement, right? We just got through COVID and we went all digital, but it isn't just all digital. There's a lot. And I think we make progress when we start to blend all these things together, right? Mail is still relevant. We found that mailing a sticker home does something, right? And then so don't throw away mail. Don't do that, right? Find the different ways to kind of add these different platforms that we now have together to create deeper engagement.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining today. I really, really appreciated the time. Fantastic insights, and we will be in touch. And if you want to reach out to the amazing speakers, their LinkedIns are all in their speaker profiles. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Sorcha.
Thank you.